long time before the Bernays, we have the Fabian network. Alice Bailey, she says, behind the division of humanity stand those enlightened ones whose right and privilege it is to watch over human evolution and to guide the destinies of men. This they do through the implanting of ideas in the minds of the world thinkers, so that these ideas in due time receive recognition and eventually become controlling factors in human life. They train the members of the new group of world servers in the task of changing these ideas into ideals. These in turn become the desired objectives of the thinkers and are then taught to the powerful middle class and worked up into world forms of governments or religion, thus forming the basis of the new world order. And she was a leading occultist, very much again in with all the major intellectuals of the day, including Bertrand Russell and George Bernard Shaw and so forth and so on. And so she's telling you that there's a hierarchy of knowledge involved, a sort of drip-down poison, an infection, starting somewhere up here in the higher realm and then drifting down until it infects everyone below, and infects them without them even knowing it. Like Vernon Howard said, the man who's under the person who doesn't believe in psychic hypnosis is probably the one under it. And talking of that, it turns out that we have this amazing statement from John Dean in his book Worse Than Watergate. Paul O'Neill, who was a member of the National Security Council as well as being in charge of fiscal policy, made a shocking revelation to Ron Suskind that not only are public events scripted, but even cabinet and other meetings within the White House with the president are scripted, where everyone but Bush has speaking parts. Bush's role is merely to nod or listen expressionlessly, aside from his occasional cryptic or even cynical comments. So these are people who've been in the inner sanctum of the White House watching this fiasco, proceed. Fred Gates, one of the Rockefeller associates, in his occasional letter, he said that people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. And see, we have kind of been told this fact about the control. Not only in popular songs, ads, and movies and literature, or the stuff that they create that also suggests this, but we've been told it openly. I mean, George Orwell's 1984 in Animal Farm. We have B.F. Skinner, the famous behaviorist who wrote a book called Walden 2. And we have Aldous Huxley in Brave New World and Brave New World Revisited. Another way to look at it, though, is generally my take on it, which I've tried to express in Architects of Control and other work. And that is that, look, you can't continually be talking about tyrannies as if it is a gun to the head, and we're being forced and coerced all the time. Sooner or later, we're going to have to ask us a more deeper question. What is it that the slave is doing to not only bring about his own enslavement, but perhaps to even bring into being the enslavers? Because ultimately, I believe that this master-slave thing is a relationship. It is in our relationships on the intimate domestic level, and it is further up the fractal. And as you know, 9 times out of 10 in the so-called conspiracy or alternative movement, that is not being dealt with. There's a lot of finger pointing, there's a lot of pointing out who the enemy is, and that's very valid and important. We need to do that. But I approach a lot of this stuff from an occult tradition, from a philosophical point of view, never forgetting that there is a relationship here between the parasite and the host. And to, in a couple of lines, just express what we were doing in Architects of Control for those who haven't seen it. Basically, we're asking a question. And that is man accepting tyranny in all its forms, both in intimate life and further up the fractal? Are we accepting that because we'd rather have external tyranny in any form than walk the road of selfhood? Now, I don't know. I say we're exploring it together. Is man so afraid of the burden, the weight of being a self? Is he so apprehensive about walking the Siddhartha road? Or he tries it and finds out, oh, Jesus, that's a bit tough. That he then makes this sort of inner contract with himself to follow the gurus and to follow the leaders and the masters, so that these tyrants, both political and religious, exist? Because you won't find carrion crows and vultures in a Japanese tea garden. If you're finding maggots, the meat is rotten. If you're finding rats, it's a sewer. Like I said, the ego is the ghost that rose out of the self, the grave of the self. So once you start looking into this deeper relationship of what we are doing, our neglect, our avoidance of selfhood, could that be in some way causing the state of decay that we see? Because don't blame the vultures and the carrion crows. They're doing exactly what they need to do. The maggots are doing exactly what they need to do. If something's dead, then don't blame the maggots. So if the psyche is in a state of decay, don't blame the predators for coming by and setting up shop. Jung said it, one of the greatest psychologists who ever lived. He said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to stop from facing their souls. No matter how absurd. And in one of my talks that I did in Los Angeles in 2012, I kind of rephrased this a little bit. I said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to stop from doing their shadow work. It's basically the same thing, but it's a little bit different slant on it. Shadow work. Looking at themselves, all parts of themselves, not just trying to live in a one-seasoned world. The great German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer said it this way: men would sooner die than think. And he's a philosopher, so even his definition of what it means to think is not what we would think it is. There's a great weight in that word, a great meaning. You are the only creatures who can do it. You can think about meaning. Dogs, animals have a very high form of consciousness, but they're not sitting there. The swan on the lake is not saying, oh shit, I'm going to die one day, life's a bitch. Right? It's not in any form of trepidation. It's not in any form of yesterday or tomorrow. It's absolutely in the now. It's absolutely there. And because it is completely present, nature is present in its consciousness. They're one. We have this sort of bittersweet ability to question who we are. Right? We're stuck with it. Maybe we're running away from it, as I said, but even if we don't go there for a minute, we have this ability to think, to reason. It's something very precious and very fragile. And we can abuse it. Or we can turn it off like most of the world has done. But he says that men would sooner die than think. It is very curious that the universality of an opinion should have so much weight with people, as their own experience might tell them that acceptance is entirely thoughtless and merely imitative process. But it tells them nothing of the kind, because they possess no self-knowledge whatsoever. He's speaking about the collectivism again, and we're going to get into that in the second half of today's presentation. I look deeper at that concept. Then I found out that, look, one really can't even deal with psychic dictatorship after all the word psyche means the mind, without really dealing with consciousness. You see how the road, you start with one thing and it leads you into another place? And I love that. That organic, natural, unbigoted, unprejudiced, unpartisan, unbiased flow is what is the magic. More important than even the goal at the end, by the way. You start off trying to bring down Big Brother. Well, my father was a communist. He worked all his life to bring down whoever, the royals or whatever. Did it work? Did he look at one moment? Did he look at his own self? No, he didn't. So the goal is less important than the process, the journey on which we go. That's where the magic is. But as I said, if you're going to talk about psychic dictatorship, you end up studying consciousness, the victim of dictatorship. And of course, philosophers all over the world, in every age, from Confucius in the East to the ones in the West, have always tried to understand this incredible thing we call consciousness. And they've tried to penetrate the mysteries of the mind. However, having said that, there's certain philosophers like Martin Heidegger who would never even use the word consciousness. He was very, very selective about the words that he used, and I don't think ever in his work he ever even used the word consciousness. Although he did use the word thinking, obviously he had to. Because in his mind, people are not conscious. They're not fully conscious yet. And this sort of echoed Hegel. I mean, not that these two philosophers were in any way the same, but it echoes what Hegel was also saying. And what later Sigmund Freud came to also talk about. Is that, you know something? If our social persona, the face we show to the world, is created socially by the approval of everybody else, then it's not an expression of selfhood, it is in fact a social construct.